And that brings the reviews to an end. Simon, I think we're going to go for what I'm hoping will be a pretty short intermission.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a fan of the podcast Screen Watching, you should also be a fan of the newsletter Always Be Watching. As we record this, Dan Barrett has led his newsletter today with Australian TV broadcasting changed forever. That is a huge headline that I'm going to get Dan to expand upon. This has to do with the legislation that was passed in Australia overnight. With regards to sport and streaming and all those things that Dan knows more about than I do. Dan Barrett, what are we looking at here? What are we talking about? Do this thing. It's a Dan Barrett special report.
Simon, I'm going to talk about legislation that was passed by the government overnight. Try to pretend you're interested. It's actually more interesting than you think it sounds. Jeez. I'm going to talk about prominence laws. I'm going to talk about anti-siphoning laws. And boy, doesn't that just sound like something you desperately want to listen to.
Sexy stuff.
It's very sexy, but it's actually kind of interesting and it's actually really going to impact the way that we watch TV and what the future is of business of TV. So I'm going to keep this really quick because it's actually pretty simple to discuss sort of once you get past the dull phrasings of prominence and anti-siphoning laws. Okay, anti-siphoning laws, this is probably the big one that's going to have the biggest impact. So Australia has what they call anti-siphoning laws. And what these are about is it was decided back in the early 90s when they were creating the legislation that would pave the way for pay televisions coming to Australia. Unlike the US and UK where cable TV had become a thing sort of 5 to 10 years prior, we didn't really get cable TV properly here until the mid-90s. In the early 90s, they redid the Australian Broadcasting Services Act, which is of 1992. And with that, basically what they did was they said, hey, look, pay TV can come into the country, but we don't want it to do what they did in the US and UK, where suddenly if you wanted to engage in what we believe is really important to Australian culture, which is sports, that you have to get expensive cable TV subscriptions in order to be able to watch your sports. They wanted to make sure that if you want to watch the AFL or the NRL or any of the other balls that people really care passionately about, you can watch it on free-to-air TV for free unless the free-to-air networks don't want that sport. So if, Channel 10, 9, 7, the ABC, SBS, if they all said, look, we don't want the AFL, then it would go to pay TV, okay? But that was always unlikely. So framework was set up where you got anti-siphoning laws, and I can't remember how many events are on there, but it's, it's in the thousands when you add up all the various sort of small events and big events and whatnot. So it's actually fairly significant to the country. But it covers every big thing. So it is that AFL, NRL, it's the Australian Open, it's the Olympics, it's the Commonwealth Games, it's the big things. And in the last couple of years, it's been expanded to a lot of the women variants on some of those sports. So like the AFLW and NRLW and all that. So all these sports that people care passionately about are available free-to-air TV. But what's been happening is that while that's available for viewing, Australian viewers are not necessarily watching their free-to-air TV the way they used to, which would be an aerial on the roof and that aerial coming down plugged into your telly. Instead, you actually find that about 60% of Australians are now watching free-to-air TV through linear streams. So instead of, and look, my house has probably been a good example for the last couple of years. I haven't had my aerial on the roof. And instead, if I wanted to watch something from one of the broadcasters, I would go to their app and I would just watch the linear stream of it. Okay, so It's even to the point that my daughter's watched so much ABC Kids over the last 6 months that she just assumes that ABC Kids as a channel can be paused and rewound and, you can jump forward. Like, she just kind of assumes that's part of the experience. Okay, she doesn't know any better. She's a dum-dum. But...
That'll age well.
What? I'll record that clip. I'll put it aside for her. But yeah, so... we're watching TV in different ways. So the government's looking at this saying, well, the legislation needs to catch up with the way that people are actually watching TV now. So Free TV Australia, which is this lobby group set up to look after the interests of the free-to-air broadcasters, they wanted to make sure that when the AFL, for example, when Channel 9's got the AFL now, that when the next round of negotiations take place for the AFL, that Channel 9, when they get the broadcast rights to it, also get the rights to that linear broadcast stream of it that can be transmitted via their digital apps. So via
Right.
9 Now on your Apple TV or your Samsung TV or whatever you've got, okay, if you've Channel 9 have purchased the rights to that in one way, through the anti-siphoning laws, that protects it to automatically have the rights for digital distribution.
Okay.
But the argument is that, well, people don't necessarily watch TV that way anymore, and why should Channel 9 necessarily have that protectionism in place? Like, they've got the broadcasters they always have, but are they necessarily supposed to have that? And the laws passed overnight are that if you're Prime Video now, for example, you could go and bid for the streaming rights of that football, okay? Channel 9 would be protected to have the broadcast, but it is open slather now to go for the streaming rights to any of these sports. And that's going to change the industry dramatically, because if 60% of Australians are accessing their linear channels at least some of the time through these apps, that's going to increase over time. And so suddenly this protectionism in place is not going to really benefit people, because if you're streaming more and more, your interest in having an aerial on your roof becomes less and less. And so people become streaming only and so lose out on that free access. The argument that Free TV makes, so just one very quick thing, the argument Free TV make, which is that, oh, Australians are losing access, you're not losing access to it, but you may have to go through an extra step to put an aerial on your roof if you want that broadcast access.
This is very interesting, and I don't know how connected this is to what we've just said, but this is all happening.
Good pun, Simon.
Oh, you like what I did there? Totally thought of that. This, over the recent 10 days or so, we've had the T20 World Cup on Amazon, which meant a big section of the cricket-loving community here in Australia didn't see it or couldn't see it, didn't have access to it. And we've also had the European football play on, I want to say one of the streamers anyway. I can't be entirely sure which one it was. But these are big-ticket sporting events that are being exclusively run by the streamers. So they're certainly making a play for this sort of content.
Look, they absolutely are. So, like, that's definitely in the formation of things. And if you look at, say, like Paramount Plus in Australia, sports is really, really important to that as a platform. Stan, they've incorporated a lot of sports into that experience. Foxtel, in terms of their digital, they set up a dedicated digital streamer called KO. Like, there is a strong investment being made right now in the idea of streaming live sports as part of a general entertainment package. I think that there's definitely... Look, the argument that the freewheeling young digital guy that I am wants to make, which is that if you want access to these sports, okay, like if you really care about it, you'd pay a couple of bucks a month to be able to access it.
You'd find a way. Yeah, exactly.
You'd find a way. I mean, the thing is, like, if I want to watch the new Star Wars show on Disney Plus, like, I'm not expecting that's provided free access to me. I have to go and pony up some cash to Disney Plus to be able to access it. But I think that there is two concerns take place, which is that one, there's three things. One, sports is really fundamental to the culture of Australia. It's part of the framework and fabric of it all. As soon as you take that away, the country does change to a certain degree. And do we necessarily want that? And I'd argue that no, I'm not a sports guy, but I kind of like that there's stuff that brings communities together, and sports can do that. Two, I can't even remember what 2 and 3 were. They were very interesting. Doesn't matter, Simon. It really doesn't matter. I was going to argue that while it's perfectly fine for me, a person who's still in my working stage of life, to say that I'll just pony up a few bucks a month and stream it, means that people who are maybe in retirement and are watching their dollars a little bit more carefully, those expenditures going out every month, that's not necessarily something where, you know, they can spend the money to watch a sport they've watched their entire life. Okay, suddenly they have to pay money for that. Like, that's kind of rough. Then the third thing as well is that if you are blocking off access to people being able to discover these sports for free, what you're going to find is that younger people aren't going to gravitate towards those sports. Okay, so if suddenly AFL, for example, is walled off onto a streaming service you don't have, then you're probably not going to watch that. You're probably not going to discover AFL. And that brings us back to point one, which is about that cultural fabric of Australia. Suddenly that just kind of drops off. And, you know, spent the last couple of years of my life in Brisbane. AFL's not particularly that inherent, not crucial to the social fabric of Queensland, but it certainly is to Melbourne. And Melbourne changes dramatically in a couple of years' time if AFL isn't at the heart of it.
Another superb Dan Barrett special report here as part of the intermission segment.
I technically didn't finish.
Oh, okay. I thought...
Only because there's the prominence laws as well, Simon. So the prominence laws...
we haven't covered that yet. All right. I'm going to go and prepare
the prominence laws, this is the super quick one. Prominence laws are basically the free-to-air TV networks are arguing, hey, look, if you've got Netflix and Amazon and Paramount and all these other apps on your TV, you may not necessarily think, hey, I'd like to download the free TV, but our services are so damn important that we should have prominence on streaming set-top boxes and smart TVs.
Prominence.
So it should be government mandated that those apps are there front and center for everyone to have to scroll past initially to if they want to stream stuff. Okay, so that idea that... back in the day, they used to argue for the prominence of AV1. And if you think about the back of your TV, you've got those AV ports. So you stuck your DVD player into AV1 and your PlayStation might go into AV2 and, whatever else goes into 3 and 4. AV1 was always the first one that you flick to. And so you'd always put the most important thing that you've watched most frequently into AV1. So back in the day, you used to fight for AV1. The same thing exists on smart TV platforms where you want to be on that first sort of row of apps that people come across because you don't keep on scrolling. You just go into the thing. That's where the prominence comes in. The free-to-air networks are like, we want to be prominent on there. The streamers are like, well, no, why should you be? And I'm actually very sensitive to that as an argument, which is I don't know why the free-to-air network should have prominence on there. They don't provide children's classified programming anymore. They don't do scripted TV really in a significant way. When was the last time you sat down to watch a drama on Channel 9, 10 or 7 that hadn't been played previously elsewhere? That doesn't happen anymore. All they're providing is news, sports, and reality programs. Is that necessarily enough to say that they should have prominence on there? They would argue and say that, well, we provide free services for people to access. And my argument to that would be, well, are you just then arguing that only free services should have the access? Because you're only arguing for the broadcasters. You're not also talking about, say, Tubi, for example, which have free movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
Or community TV, if they've got their apps. I just think it's a bit of a dumb argument, but the government certainly kowtowed to that and said that, yes, there is prominence, but boy, did they piss off the free-to-air broadcasters with this, because they said it's not going to be applied to all TVs. It's only to TVs that are produced 18 months from now, okay? And it's only new TVs. So your TV at home will be not impacted at all. So it's going to take years for this to really come into place. And look, 18 months is a really long time in this space.
Now, I will say another superb Dan Barrett special report in which Dan Barrett sums up the recent Australian government legislation on prominence and its anti-siphoning laws. Dan Barrett, it's good to have your voice back on these sort of issues. Nobody in Australia, it's probably saying too much. Most people in Australia have no idea how across these issues you really are, and giving you the floor space like that makes it all worthwhile. Thank you, my friend. This podcast is heading into its 7th hour. We really should get on with it.